Hi, my name is Karina Barbosa, and I am doing this presentation for Module Discussion 3 for Info 5405 regarding collection development and selection criteria. As a brief roadmap, I'll be doing the collection policy, reasons to have one, self-censorship, and the assigned reading of children's collection development. So first off, I wanted to start the collection development policy, or how it's commonly known as CDP, with the quote from the Adams article I had about reasons to have one of these, which is, a school without a selection policy is vulnerable to complaints about library resources with no guidance on how to proceed and little legal basis for protecting students' First Amendment rights. This article says that one of the strongest things to have defense against censorship is a material selection policy, is a collection policy, not only because it contains the seeds for defense in case of a challenge, but also because it's able to demonstrate how the challenged resource meets approved selection criteria, which is a powerful argument for retention of a resource, which comes into one of the main reasons on why we should have one. So the first, like I said, is guidance. You'll see that I kind of covered the second bullet point already, but also for using it as a planning document, because how do we select what is the best for our population? How do we select what are the best resources? Because not only are we only dealing with print sources now, we're also dealing with more electronic media. So making a planning document is really helpful with making this collection policy. As a guide for potentially controversial resources, having a selection criteria put in place and showing how it meets those things, how it's able to diversify different perspectives, how it's able to diversify to the needs of each of the individual patrons. Which kind of ties into the last point, which means the needs of all users. Because without having one of these in place, a collection can actually develop in a haphazard way as opposed to a rational and orderly way. In the Van Ziegel article that I found, it talked about an academic library where, because some library patrons, like certain professors, visited the library more, they were more vocal as opposed to others who didn't necessarily visit as much but still had subjects that they taught. That collection developed unevenly, and so they would have some sections of that library that would only have maybe 6 books in the time span of 20 years, which can lead to very frustrated patrons of the library. Another thing is it provides a means of protection. I've already extensively covered censorship, but another thing is for materials that are purchases that are irrelevant or even harmful to users, because a lot of times we do want to value the input of the population that we serve, but we want to make sure that they fit a specific set of criteria, because they might not help anybody, making it irrelevant, or they might actively be harmful to others because there might be people trying to push a certain agenda, which kind of ties into the censorship thing. And the last thing is it can prevent, or it protects us from unreasonable reactions, I should say, because there are also, on the flip side of that, people who want to make gifts to the collection, but not all gifts can obviously be accepted. And sometimes when gifts are accepted, it can have an unreasonable reaction or feelings of hurt. So showing specifically why it did not meet certain criteria could help protect us from that, as well as when people see weeding practice going on, like, oh, why are you throwing out all these books? Well, because this is how it no longer meets the criteria, or, it has like musty or the crew method. There's a justification for that. And last but not least, this kind of all ties it all together to decision-making tool. Especially because as libraries are continuing to move forward, the task of selection is much more complex now. Moving on to self-censorship. So we talk about problems with self-censorship. One of the main things is that it limits the rights of the students. So from the Moeller article, it actually references the Supreme Court decision of the Board of Education versus PICO, which says that intellectual freedom of students to utilize school library as a space for voluntary inquiry. If we do too much self-censorship, that space for voluntary inquiry basically and essentially gets taken away. On top of that, it provides for some materials are restricted for some and not for others. And last but not least, it is preempting the challenges because we want to make our lives a little simpler, because we don't have enough time, because we don't have enough resources on the daily, so we just would rather not have that fight. There's no certainty that there will be a fight, so us not even having that resource just has a lack of access. There's an awareness of mind, so like I said, it can lead to an unequal library experience. Also, librarians aside instead of the readers, which takes away some of that ownership from there. And I've already mentioned some of those biases. Some of the things I learned from there is that some of the key factors associated with self-censorship is a lack of education and experience. There's also informal challenges, so there's like theft of the books from the library. There's refusal to return a book, and some even do direct censorship where they cross out certain aspects. This happens from both the librarians and from the patrons. Having restricted collections, meaning that they're in a different location, like perhaps they're behind the circulation desk or in a certain other room, and they have to be on request by a patron, or perhaps a note is required from a parent, or it's limited to just certain grades. One of the article from Moeller has a particular focus on graphic novels, and it shows that they are challenged disproportionately. That's shown by the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund. And one last thing that I found very interesting was that teachers also self-censor, and this has to do with more on perceived community values and fears on how they might be regarded professionally. These are some images I had from the school library journal that kind of help illustrate that point. And last but not least is the Children's Collection Development article. What the main things I got from here is that deciding between a good book and a book kids like is actually a false dichotomy, because more to do with the question of what is a quality book in the first place. And a quality book has 5 characteristics, which I have down at the bottom left of the screen. And good books, if they have all of those, they have the power to satisfy and delight, whereas a bad book does not satisfy and delight. So taking all this information in my library, I will use the criteria of quality books to make informed decisions, and I aim to select books that have quality and/or appeal, at least one of the characteristics, but if I have both of them, then that is amazing. And this is my works cited. Thank you for your time.